What's up, guys? It is James here, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about the top 5. I think I'm going to hit 5 things that you should consider. My top 5 kind of tips, things you should consider when you're investing in short-term rental properties, more commonly known as Airbnbs or vacation rentals. So for those of you who don't know, I've been managing, consulting on investing in short-term rental properties for just over 6 years now. I wrote the book Airbnb for Dummies, so I've got quite a bit of experience when it comes to short-term rentals. And so in this video, I really just want to share with you a couple of things that you should really take into consideration before you start investing in properties for Airbnb. Now, if you're new to the channel and you don't already know, down in the description, there are some free trainings, free resources for you to take advantage of. They are trainings that I put together that you can use completely free. There's no cost in them whatsoever. So I highly recommend that you check them out depending on what your goals are. There is a free training that's really new that we've just put together on how to actually invest successfully into properties for short-term rental. So if you are interested in actually buying and building a portfolio of short-term rental properties that you actually own, then I highly recommend you check out that free training there. And it's also going to give you a free tool to be able to analyze these properties. Now, if you're more interested in managing other people's properties for Airbnb without having to invest into down payments, buying, renting, anything like that, not having to buy furniture, like a business that you can really get started without investing any of your own money and actually manage other people's properties on Airbnb and build a 6-figure income doing that. That's how I first got started. That free training is also linked in the description down below. And we're also going to give you some free tools to help you actually get started on that path as well. And then lastly, if you are a host on Airbnb, then there's a free training link down below. If you're already hosting and you just want to improve your hosting, make it more streamlined and more profitable, we've got a free training for that as well. So all that said, let's get started with some tips, some guidelines, some things that you should consider before you start investing in properties for short-term rental. Number one, drum roll please, is going to be I think it's worth considering that most people don't analyze properties the right way, and that the number one mistake I see people making is not analyzing properties properly. So the one thing you do need to consider is how much is this property actually going to make in both a best case scenario and a worst case scenario. So I've got other videos on this channel that walk through my entire process for analyzing properties, my whole step-by-step system. Again, the training that's linked down below is going to walk through that and also give you some tools to do that. That's by and large the number one biggest mistake that I see people making. And I know I've got this crystal ball where I can see into the future, and I can see that a lot of investors are going to lose a lot of money when times are not as good as they are right now. Because right now, a lot of properties are still doing well, even with the pandemic. You know, everything going on in the world, there's still properties that make a lot of sense and you can't really go wrong with. But when and if things do start to change economically speaking, you want to have backup plans in place. You don't want to be reliant on the gravy train keeping going. So you want to kind of take into consideration different scenarios, look at different what ifs. What am I going to do? Make sure you're never going to be in a place where you are forced to sell your property because it costs money to carry it. I see a lot of operators, a lot of investors that have properties that do not meet that test, do not meet that criteria. So that's the number one thing you need to consider is how much money is this going to bring in, not just in the best case scenario, but also in the worst case scenario. Now that ties into thing number 2, tip number 2 that I'd recommend you consider is that seasonality impacts cash flow, but not profitability. So that's one thing that I also see investors making the mistake of is they look at certain markets and they look and they go, well, there's a high season and a low season, and I just don't know if the property is going to make sense in a low season. Well, in most areas that are like that, the high season, you make so much money that it actually still makes sense. Even if the property sits relatively vacant in the low season, your annual return is still going to be really significant. So, seasonality is something you do have to consider from a cash flow perspective, just making sure that you kind of squirrel away your cash in the summertime or in the high season so that you can cover all your expenses in the low season, but it doesn't impact your overall profitability, right? It just means that the income is coming in at different times throughout the year, but doesn't actually change the amount of income coming in throughout the year. And that ties in very nicely to the third thing I'd recommend considering is that a lot of people also view short-term rentals as being very risky and volatile, when in reality, the revenue just fluctuates from month to month in a very predictable way that's based on seasonality. So that's something I always recommend that people remember and kind of keep in their head, is that it's not this big mystery box. If you use the right tools and you have the right data to run your analysis, you can actually predict with relative certainty how much a property is going to bring in on an annualized basis. So we can use tools like AirDNA to look at that information. We can go and look at comps in the area and figure out how much a property is going to bring in. We can look at how that demand has increased or decreased over the last 3-4 years. So we can really figure out pretty effectively and pretty accurately how much a property is going to bring in. It's not that it's volatile, it's not that it's risky, it's not that it's unpredictable. It's just that unlike a long-term rental that's going to bring the exact same amount of money every single month, it's either going to be this much or it's going to be zero if it's vacant, where it's going to vary, but it's not unpredictable. It varies in a highly predictable way. So those are the top 3 things that I recommend you consider, my top 3 tips, and they're all revolving around the financial aspect. And a lot of the things that I find are kind of muddying the water for a lot of people that are looking to get into this space. I think a lot of it is just due to a lack of kind of education, understanding. But once people start to get an understanding of this stuff, that's when I see the light bulb go off and they go, wow, this is what you've been talking about. This is why there's so much demand now for short-term rentals investing. This is why investors are flocking to this area, because as soon as we can kind of decode these things that seem mysterious, then it's like, okay, everything makes sense and it lines up. Now, the other things that I'd recommend, number 4, I would recommend that you keep in mind, thing that you want to consider, my tip to you, is that operating a short-term rental is obviously quite different from operating a long-term rental, and that it requires some different skill sets, but that it doesn't have to be super hands-on. So there's kind of 2 things that I like to remind people here. I'm going to tie them into one because I've got one other one that I really want to touch on. So what I see people looking at is they go, well, I'm just going to jump into this and I'm sure it's going to be easy, is the one kind of group of people. And to them, I want to remind them that it's not just like managing a long-term rental. It's more hospitality. Like, this is a lot more like running a hotel than it is similar to running a long-term rental property. You got to furnish the property and you're going to have expenses with that. You have to do your guest communication, or someone has to do the guest communication. Someone's got to adjust the prices. So there's a lot more involved in it. And I see this kind of impacting people all throughout the business when they don't take this into consideration. Either it just becomes really overwhelming for them, or they're skimpy and they don't want to spend money where it makes sense to, where it's like a total no-brainer to. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But then the other group of people I see out there oftentimes are the ones that are kind of thinking, well, having an Airbnb or short-term rental, that's a full-time job. That's not passive income. That's not even close to passive income. So I don't even want to touch that. It's just way too much work. And to those people, I would say, you just need to find the right deal. Because if you find the right deal, then there's going to be enough margin that you can hire a professional property manager. And you don't even have to. But if you want to be completely hands-off and really just not touch the thing, then just hire a property manager. And it's a lot easier to hire a good property manager for a short-term rental than it is for a long-term rental, because the upside for a property manager is a lot higher. They're not just making $50 or $100 a month on your unit. They're making, $800 to $1,000. So you are paying for that, but as long as you can still make a really strong return on your investment while accounting for the cost of a property manager, why not, right? Makes a lot of sense. But the other option as well is that you can do it yourself, and you can learn how to set systems up to make it highly passive. So again, that does require investment of time up front to create those systems, to set them up, get everything running smoothly. But then once they are set up, you can spend just 20, 30 minutes a month going over your financials, and not much more beyond that actually managing the property. So again, if you want all the systems and tools and strategies for how to do that, then I highly recommend that you check out the link down below in the description to that free training, where we're actually going to walk through that. This is coming from my background of actually having run a short-term rental management company. So I've got some really great insights to share and some really great tools and systems to share. Again, all that is inside of that free training. The last thing the biggest tip that I have for people that are operating short-term rentals, or they're looking to get into short-term rentals, is that you do not want to just set it and forget it with your pricing. This is the one thing you really want to remember, is that by optimizing your pricing, you can literally, that's one of the highest returns you'll ever get on the time that you invest, is by just optimizing your pricing. If you optimize your pricing, it literally takes maybe 10 to 15 minutes per week. It's not a lot of time. It adds up to about an hour a month, and you can get $10, $20, $30, $40,000 a year more from your property just by optimizing prices. For one great example, a property that I recently invested in, that I've broken down this channel, I've talked about in depth in this channel, we thought that property would bring in a best case scenario, about $100,000 to $120,000 in a year. Now, it turned out that this was a runaway year with everything going on with lockdowns and restrictions and everything. And so we're trending towards about $150,000 we're going to bring in with that property. So that $30,000, if we had just set it and forget it with our pricing and not touched it, we would have been leaving that $30,000 on the table where the property would have just gotten booked up for less and we wouldn't have captured that additional revenue. Because we saw those signs, because we're in there monitoring and analyzing our pricing and optimizing it, we were able to bring in $30,000 worth of additional booking revenue in 1 year on that property off of an hour a month. So that's 12 hours of input and you get $30,000 of output, right? That's a pretty substantial difference in terms of how much that property is bringing in and what you're getting paid for your time. So optimizing pricing is one thing that is really, really high leverage in the kind of investing strategy or the business of short-term rentals. So those are my main tips. I've got a ton more. So if you're interested, check out the rest of the videos on this channel where we dig into all this stuff in greater detail and greater depth. If you're interested, make sure you check out the free trainings that are linked down below. I put those together, trying to distill my years and years of experience. So whatever path you're on, whether you're hosting your own space on Airbnb, whether you are looking to manage other people's properties on Airbnb and build that into a full-time income, or whether you want to start investing and building a portfolio of properties for Airbnb, there is a training down there below that is going to fit you. So make sure you take advantage of it. It's completely free. So grab it while it's there before it's gone. And last, if you like this video, if you got value from it, then obviously give it a like, hit that thumbs up button. It really helps me out to grow the channel, get more traction here, reach more people, because I want more people to know about how amazing short-term rentals are as a vehicle for financial freedom. So all that being said, the last thing I'm going to ask from you is that you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And with all that out of the way, I'll see you in the next video. Have a great day.